Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today's episode is a crossover episode, republished from the Ohio Fund Report, a companion podcast where I explore some of the most ambitious companies and builders shaping Ohio's future. Stories that feel right at home here on Lay of the Land. So with that, please enjoy. Lay of the Land is brought to you and is proudly sponsored by Roundstone Insurance. Headquartered in Rocky River, Ohio, Roundstone shares Lay of the Land's same passion for bold ideas and lasting impact from our community's entrepreneurs, innovators, and leaders. Since 2005, Roundstone has pioneered a self-funded captive health insurance model that delivers robust savings for small and medium-sized businesses. They are part of the solution to rising healthcare costs, helping employers offer affordable, high-quality care while driving job creation and economic growth throughout Northeast Ohio. Like many of the voices featured on Lay of the Land, including Roundstone's founder and CEO Mike Schroeder, Roundstone believes entrepreneurship, innovation, and community to be the cornerstones of progress. To learn more about how Roundstone is transforming employee health benefits by empowering employers to save thousands in per-employee, per-year healthcare costs, please visit RoundstoneInsurance.com. Roundstone Insurance, built for entrepreneurs, backed by innovation, committed to Cleveland.
We went to this farmer's market around here just with like little boxes and like a square reader.
Yeah.
And we had this sign printed up that said, "The world's best dog food is made in Cleveland." I think the first thing I want you to know about us is that we make the world's best dog food, but in the top 5 is that we also make it in Cleveland.
Hello, everyone. I am Jeffrey Stern, your host of today's Ohio Fund Report with Michael and Tory Waxman, the founders of Sundays for Dogs. Sundays is a Cleveland-based company designed to make dog parents' lives easy. What began with their own dog, Mabel, and the simple question that Dr. Tory, who is a seasoned veterinarian and loving dog parent, kept asking of why feeding Mabel and other dogs had to be so difficult, has since grown into one of the most exciting national consumer brands to emerge from Ohio as a leader of human-grade, zero synthetics, veterinarian-formulated dog food. Since my last conversation with Michael and Tory in 2023 on Lay of the Land, Sundays has scaled massively. They've raised more than $55 million in capital, built out a Cleveland-based R&D Test Kitchen, where our conversation today took place, and have grown from a direct consumer upstart into a nationally recognized brand preparing for omni-channel distribution. Along the way, they have not only created a product that dogs love, but a company that sits at the forefront of a booming pet food market. In our conversation, Michael and Tory reflect on Sunday's journey thus far, explore what's on the horizon for the company, and unpack how they have navigated the challenges of scaling, from customer acquisition and marketing shifts to balancing supply and demand to elevating their senior leadership team, all while holding true to the values that inspired Sundays from the start, making it easier to be an awesome dog parent. So with that, please enjoy this awesome conversation with Michael and Tory Waxman.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ohio Fund Report, a show dedicated to raising the collective ambition of Ohio. Before we dive in, just a quick note. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Nothing you hear today should be taken as investment advice, a recommendation, or an offer to buy or sell any securities. Please note that the Ohio Fund and its affiliates may maintain investments in the companies discussed. Any forward-looking statements you hear today are based on current expectations and may change. Please do your own research and consult with your advisors before making any investment decisions. For more information on the Ohio Fund, please visit theohiofund.com.
Michael, Tory, it's good to see you. Been a few years now since we've formally sat down and been able to reflect on the Sundays journey thus far, which in startup time is like an eternity. And
I love to joke that startup years are like dog years. So
Yeah.
It's been about 20 years since the podcast.
that sounds about right. And we'll unpack those 20 years and what's transpired in that time. But I thought just to kind of, level set and ground the conversation, for those to whom maybe this is their first time, hearing about Sundays, just a little bit about both of yourself and how, we got to where we are here today, and just kind of an overview of Sundays itself.
Sure. If there's one thing to know about Sundays, it's that we make the world's best dog food. And it was born out of a veterinarian and a software engineer, Silicon Valley product guy. And, I think that in a weird way, companies are such the product of the DNA of their founders in this kind of inescapable, inevitable way, for better and for worse, because we're humans and have flaws and biases. But I think, all companies, big and small, really are reflections of their founders. And I think for us, Tory just brings to the table this deep care for animals and setting a new standard in what dog food can be and really holding us to it. And for me, I kind of have this, maybe delusional idea from Silicon Valley that a great product can really change the world for the better. And no better category to do that in than for dogs, because as we always joke, if the roles were reversed, we know this is what they do for us. And so it's kind of the least we can do to really try to elevate the whole field.
So there's a certain business aphorism, which are normally trite, but grounded in some kind of truth, which is the idea that what got you here won't get you there. And that the reward for solving the problems that get you here is just new problems, maybe bigger problems, but problems nonetheless. And I thought that's kind of a fun framing for our conversation here today, knowing, what got you to our conversation last time and call it early 23 is very different than what it took to get from 23 to where we are here today. And it's probably going to look very different from when we sit down in another 2 years. What it'll look like then. And really, as a frame to talk about every part of the business, from how your thoughts on brand, the product, operations, leadership, just kind of scaling across the board. So with that in mind, I just kind of wanted to ask, what's been the most surprising, and salient learnings you've had of growing Sundays over the last 2 years and getting it to here?
I've probably had 100 this week, but Tory, do you want to chime in at that? And I have plenty of thoughts.
Yeah, I think that taking more control over our R&D, the R&D side of the business has been something that, I think that 2 or 3 years ago, I would have thought, we can continue to outsource that. We can continue to work with outside partners, especially as we grow. We're going to get bigger and bigger. So we're going to outgrow our manufacturers. We're going to need more. We're going to need bigger. But at the end of the day, when it came down to it, what we concluded was we really wanted more control over that. And it ended up going even way smaller than I imagined. And here we are in a kitchen that is now our R&D facility right here in Cleveland. And so instead of depending on outside partners for doing our test batches and, making changes to our recipes, we can do that all here ourselves. And just having that control and not depending on outside partners and really owning all of that has been really a huge unlock. And as I said, I never would have expected to go smaller, but in a way that it allows us to make those multiple changes and to do multiple experiments and look into many different changes we could possibly make to our current recipes as well as future recipes. We're always trying to do the best we can. As we think our dog food's the best, but we're always looking at ways to make it better. So we're looking at iterating our current recipes. We're looking at creating future recipes. And by taking control of that ourselves, I'm hoping that we can do it better and make it better.
So I remember when we sat down last time to talk about Sundays, how, at inception, you were working through the development of recipes yourself and just, how that's evolved over time, and maybe just speak a little bit more to, where we are here today and what those unlocks have been for the business.
Yeah, it's funny because my answer to the question of like, what's probably the biggest thing I've learned over the past 2 years is there's this line I heard recently of you either believe in expertise or you don't. And I think this last chapter has been a lot about making the jump from a startup where everyone's a generalist and there's actually pretty little expertise around the table. And of course, obviously, Tory has the background of a veterinarian and people have their expertise. But in general, you have a lot of people doing things in ways that they've never done them before. And then as you start to scale the business, you realize that you really do need people with expertise who have dealt with the complexity and the risk mitigation and they have overcome the constraints of scaling something. But then there's this whole fear you have as a early stage startup person of, well, are they going to be too slow? Are they going to be too corporate? And I mean, the reality is some of them are. But one of the things we've been really blessed with recently is being able to bring people onto the team who kind of have both. So they've come from these big companies, they have PhDs, or they have these really deep expertises in businesses that are much larger than we are today, and they can see around the corners and help us navigate the next set of challenges. And yet they're really mission driven. They're really scrappy and quick. And so I think that, and then that kind of brings us back to the test kitchen of, hey, some of our early R&D efforts, we kind of, had a lot of generalists around the table. And I think in retrospect, that kind of slowed us down because we were all learning together. And all of a sudden it was, what if we actually pulled in a food scientist who's done this for a decade and brought in some other veterinary nutritionists and animal nutritionist PhDs. And if you do it the right way, it definitely has helped us go faster, further. And again, I think the test kitchen is a great example of that because it was really the brainchild of Vince, our head of operations. And he was the second employee of Kevin's Natural Foods, which was this amazing high growth company that sold to Mars for $1 billion or something. And, that was just one example of someone who had built a factory, built an R&D center. They were kind of like a meal kit business at first. So they had to create hundreds of recipes. And he just kind of demystified it for us of, hey, yeah, we can make our own recipes. We can do our own test kitchen. It involves all these things. You have to bring in all this equipment and all this expertise. But, I think having people with the experience who have already done it gave us the courage to make the leap for some of these things.
Sundays has scaled over the last few years, kind of operating at a higher order of magnitude, if you will. How have you seen the market itself change over that same kind of time? What's the state of dog food?
As I like to joke, it's a good time to be selling dog food. It's an even better time to be a dog. There are a lot of great options out there. Look, having done a few startups before, I think the only way to really build a meaningful business is to be riding on some kind of wave, right? That is larger than your company or your product. Mm-hmm. And I think we've just kind of continued to see this groundswell of a whole generation of dog parents who are looking for something better. And so I think you've only seen those trends continue to accelerate. And in my opinion, I actually think I'm curious, Tory to weigh in on this from the vet perspective, but I actually think we're really early innings in this wave because today still probably 90 to 95% of people are feeding Kibble, which is sort of this last generation of dog food. And, just based on our growth and some of the surveys we do talking to customers, I think at this point, as much as half of people are looking for something better, they want something healthier, more in line with the way they treat their dog as a member of the family who sleeps in their bed and so on. And now I think it's just a question of, what is that thing that comes after Kibble? And obviously in our view of the world, it's Sundays. And we imagine a future 10 years from now where Sundays or something like Sundays, human grade, shelf stable, fresh is the default form factor that 90% of dogs eat. But we have a really long way to go to get there. But it's cool to be the beneficiaries of a wave like that, though, because, you have other brands like the Farmer's Dog and even us now, like we run TV ads. And so there's, consumers are getting this surround sound education in here are the benefits of feeding a healthier dog food, of feeding a human grade dog food. And then we can just come in and say, oh, and by the way, like we think this is the best option in that. And so, but obviously there's a flip side of that of, the market just gets more and more crowded and how do you stand out and how do you cut through the noise? And so it cuts both ways. But overall, I think it's a great sign to see the mission we're trying to achieve just gain so much momentum.
Yeah. Well, something that you had mentioned a while ago that stuck with me about just kind of the whole vision is like, what if there wasn't an asterisk? And the asterisk, being human grade, but then there's all the fine.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of veterinarians nowadays frequently have nutrition conversations with their clients because they want to feed something better. But I can tell you as a veterinarian, it was hard to read through all the marketing language. Every company said they were the best. Every company said they were all natural and did this and did that. And at the end of the day, your job is first and foremost to take care of sick animals, keep animals healthy. You didn't have time to get weighed down by all of these different claims and try to, figure out exactly what all these companies were standing for. And so, when I started Sundays, my goal was to just create the diet that I felt was the best out there and the best for the dog and the easiest. I mean, as I joked last time, and it's still true, I don't cook for my own family every night. So I'm not going to be, cooking for my dogs every night. And so if there is something out there that's as easy as just pouring food into a bowl, but that is as healthy and as nutritious as feeding, whole foods to create a complete and balanced meal, I mean, that is kind of the goal of Sundays. And I think that veterinarians are becoming more and more aware of, the multiple diets available and the different form factors. And I do think that pet parents are continuing to demand a higher level of quality. And we're seeing that reflected in the market. And I just hope that, we can kind of break through the noise and show that, we're not just another marketing company that happens to make dog food. At the end of the day, we're super passionate about our dogs. And I mean, we joke that we make Sundays for our own dogs and we happen to share it with other dogs, but it's true. Every batch of Sundays is made for our dogs. We begrudgingly to them share it with other dogs, but it really is a passion project. And, as a busy human and dog mom myself, I don't have time to do everything, even though I try. And so if I can just make one thing in my day a little bit easier, such as feeding them, the best food I can, but in the easiest way possible, like that is just like a little unlock for me in my busy life.
Well, you mentioned investment in leadership and narrow expertise. Is Mabel still the chief taste tester of the company?
She is, but it's only because she has a lot of experience now, a lot of reps under her belt. She's eaten a lot of bad test batches and a lot of good ones. And so when she signs off, we know we're at least at her bar, which is pretty high.
Yeah. So how has your thinking on the marketing side of the business evolved? Obviously, the core is the product, and we can talk a little bit more about your vision for where that goes, more of what this kind of R&D unlocks. But you mentioned kind of there's more being pushed at consumers about alternatives to Kibble and what folks might be familiar with. How do you differentiate in this space?
That's such a great question, and I mean, I think so. We're kind of fighting two different fights. I think one is explaining to people simply and clearly how different we are from Kibble, right? And so we're solving a totally different problem than Kibble is, right? Kibble is the cheapest way to give your dogs the kind of bare minimum nutrients they need to survive. And that is an industry that's been around for 50 years. It's incredibly well optimized for cost. It's one of the cheapest sources of calories on earth. And you can feed dogs a Kibble and they can live a long and full life eating Kibble. But we're trying to do something totally different, which is we're trying to create the best possible food for your dog to thrive and fulfill them, not just nutritionally and with the highest food safety standards, but also with taste, right? I mean, we think of our dogs, we've started to humanize them and we want them to kind of like self-actualize and live their best life and enjoy every meal. And so we're kind of solving this totally different problem. And I think, again, more dog parents view their dogs that way. And so they kind of get it. Then the question becomes, all right, so you're convinced you want to feed your dog something better than kibble, but what should that be? What's too much? What's too little? And so that's kind of the other side of the equation of how do we kind of plainly, succinctly say that this is the best alternative dog food in the world. And the reality is, I think we're still early on our journey there. I think our product is still far ahead of our marketing and our ability to tell a story about that product. And so one of the things that we've done on and off and we've recently leaned back into is just sampling and, going to places where our customers are, where dogs are, and just getting food in bowls in front of humans and dogs. And that, sort of a picture says 1,000 words, a dog gobbling up the food or the smell of it because it smells totally different than dog food. It's like a artisanal jerky because that's kind of what it is. That we found is sort of the simplest way just for people to get it. But, look, in the grand scheme of things, this next chapter of our journey is all about how do we just get the word out about Sundays. We have a product that dogs love, that, it works as a business. And so it's just, there's 100 million dogs in the US and the vast majority of them have never heard of us, have never tried Sundays. And then how do you get the word out? And it's kind of the things you'd expect. It's Facebook ads and, increasingly things like TV that reach a wider audience. And then it's also, what are maybe the creative ways to reach people on sampling? Can we go places where dogs are and people are? Like, we joke sometimes, like if we ever to open a first retail store, like maybe we do it in an airport or something. Cause, you go to an airport now and it's like there's dogs everywhere, but no one's selling dog food. And so I think, while we're in this kind of cultural sea change of the way people treat dogs, there's all these new opportunities opening up, and we just have to figure out, it's kind of marketing 101, right? Like, who's your customer? Where are they? How do you reach them? And ideally, how do you do it in a way that your competitors aren't? And, and then I guess the last thing I'll say on that is I think for us, we sort of have this like tragedy of riches where there's so many great things about our product because we made it from first principles to be the best. And so there's so many things you can say about it. It's human grade. It's all natural. It's synthetic free. It's 90% meat. It beats the best tasting kibble in a taste test 30-0. It's, we spend 50 times more on our ingredients than kibble. So for every $5 we put in our ingredients, a premium kibble only puts 10 cents. But as you scale, you kind of just need to simplify that message even further and make it more aerodynamic. And in a 10-second Instagram ad or a 30 seconds TV ad, what's the one thing we want you to know about us? And, I think we're still figuring out what that is. Is it that we're vet founded? Is it that we have the cleanest ingredients? But I'd rather have that problem than the reverse. But I think we have a lot of work to do to kind of just simplify and clarify our message even more as we try to reach a wider audience.
Well, and for better or worse, I feel like the medium of marketing and the kind of narrowing of the time you have to relay a message kind of forces that question to you guys anyway.
Oh, 100%. I mean, attention spans are shorter than ever. And, I think one of the elements we try to lean into is the unexpected a little bit. And so we're launching a new recipe early next year, which came out of this test kitchen, which, enabled us to bring it to market. And, without giving anything away, I think we're going to lean into whimsy a little bit and surprise and get people to turn heads because there's just so much going on in the world. It's really hard and a privilege to actually capture people's attention. But again, though, like we're in such a fruitful area, right? We're talking about dogs. We're doing things that are genuinely new and different. And so with a little bit of courage and creativity, we have that opportunity. But, this upcoming launch, I think, is going to be a good opportunity for us to stretch our wings a little bit and, just do some fun things with the product and with the launch. Because look, dogs are fun.
Dogs are pretty fun. Well, I'll pull on the fruitful thread for a moment, because one of the things that was not obvious to me, I think, when we spoke 2 years ago, but has since been made pretty clear, is I didn't actually understand that Ohio is basically the dog food capital of the country. So just from a geographic standpoint, just talk for a moment about what it's been to invest in growth in Sundays here.
Well, first of all, Ohio is, as a place that's had a lot of agriculture and meat, that tends to be where the dog food companies have been made. And you have, Nestle has their global headquarters of supply based right here in Cleveland. They're the second largest dog food company in the world behind Mars. Bill Jack is, 30 minutes down the road, and they were an innovator. They were the first refrigerated dog food brand, and that's become very popular in recent years, but they were around for decades. Yep. And you have some of the biggest Kibble and other manufacturing plants in Ohio. You have Smucker, which up until recently had one of the biggest dog food portfolios in the world before they sold most of it off to Post. And so, it's going back to that theme of bringing in expertise, we're very fortunate to be in a place that has a ton of that expertise already right around us. We're close to the supply chain, and so a lot of our key raw materials are nearby. We're centrally located. We're starting to do more and more of our shipping out of Cleveland. And so, look, we've had such a funny journey because we launched during COVID. And so our 0 to 1 story was totally on Zoom. There was this period from 2020 to 2021 where we had never met some of our early employees or investors in person because you couldn't travel, and everybody remembers those crazy times if you haven't blacked them out of your memory. And so then it became a funny thing of, all right, in 2022, people are getting back together. How do we scale this business? And I think, frankly, a hard lesson we learned is that, especially when it comes to operations, you really do need to be in person. There's certain work that is, I think, totally fine on Zoom or remote. But when you're making stuff, when you're shipping stuff, when you're doing real research and R&D like we're doing here at the Test Kitchen, there's nothing that comes close to face-to-face. And so then, we had kind of this funny adolescent period where, all right, do we have people move to Cleveland? So Vince is a great example. He started with us and he lived in Texas, and he, packed up in a U-Haul with his whole family and moved to Cleveland just a few months ago as we were opening the Test Kitchen. And it's, we've started to centralize our operations here. And again, it's centrally located. There's a ton of CPG and food expertise in the area. And, and thanks to folks like the Ohio Fund, increasingly there's capital, there's space, there's a brand new office building that we have some space in here. And so really there's all the pieces that you need. And then, of course, it's a really affordable cost of living here. And so, before we're, throwing off tons of free cash flow for every dollar to go 2 or 3 times further than it would on the coast, it's really invaluable to a startup.
I remember you mentioning your early investors were excited about the prospect of you guys coming back to Ohio. Because of that.
No, exactly. They get it, right? We're just, trying to, on the business level, turn a small pile of money into a larger pile of money, and in a place where you have the expertise and the talent, but everything just costs less, it really increases your margin for error.
So I didn't necessarily want to revisit COVID, but you did bring it up. And I remember this incredible story that you had told about how during that period, you were trying to procure a few thousand pounds of beef, and the meat supply basically fell through, and you had to kind of creatively, very entrepreneurial fashion, figure out where to get beef. And I'll just use that as a segue to talk about, I think, supply, because one of the benefits, as far as the original framing of solve problems, unlock new problems, is that as the demand for Sundays grows and more people are aware of it and more people want it, you have to make sure there's enough dog food on the other side. And so I know over time you guys have come up to the limit of supply and how the evolution of your thinking on just making sure the supply chain is robust. And I've always found that story awesome. But
I mean, over the past year, obviously there's been a lot of talk of the tariffs.
Yeah.
But the good news is that almost all of our ingredients come from the U.S. So that honestly was not a big issue for us. Our only one ingredient we get overseas is the calcium phosphorus source in our dog food is this grass-fed beef bone from Australia that's ground up, and that's what we put in our food is our calcium phosphorus source. So that's kind of our one international ingredient. But overall, most of our ingredients do come from the U.S. So we were very lucky to be shielded from a lot of the tariff issues. And it's funny, we had a lot of people be like, "Oh my goodness, what are you guys doing about the tariffs?" We were like, honestly, we really haven't thought about it. So we were pretty lucky on that front. As we grow, as Mike was touching on before, we've been able to hire experts. The fact that 5 or 6 years ago, I was in charge of all of our ingredient procurement and supply chain is terrifying to think about. Thank God we have actual experts dealing with these things now. But we've brought on some incredible people in terms of supply chain and then also food safety, just to make sure that as we grow, we continue to hold ourselves to the highest standards. And so even though we've been so lucky to grow, we're not letting that get in the way of how we hold ourselves to the highest standards and make sure that we continue to do so. And so we've been able to get some incredible people in the right seats to make sure that we continue to create the best and safest possible food for dogs. And so I'm really proud of our supply chain from that perspective, just from a food safety perspective as we continue to scale. And then also just from an ingredient perspective, I know you had put eggs on there, and eggs was definitely something that So egg prices is something we do source domestically, but unfortunately there was that surge in egg pricing. And so the thing with eggs, just as a side note from a nerdy formulation side, eggs are great because they're a great protein source. They are also a great source of many vitamins and minerals like vitamin B12 and vitamin D and selenium, but also they have a complete amino acid profile, which very few protein sources have that nice complete amino acid profile. So for many reasons, I love working with eggs in our food. But unfortunately, we ran into an issue with egg pricing. But because of, our robust supply chain team, we were able to kind of figure things out and make sure that we are continuing to include the high quality egg in our food. And we honestly, it cost us more. We did not pass that on to customers because we were not willing to, make any kind of compromises on the quality of the product that we're putting in our food. And I think things have leveled out, but the eggs was definitely a big, I don't know if you want to kind of follow up on that, but.
No, I mean, the eggs were honestly just a nightmare. I mean, I think at the peak, we were literally paying 6 times more for eggs than we used to because, I mean, they're a human grade egg, but we obviously have a very specific spec and we have to buy it in big quantities. So when it goes up twice in the grocery store, we're buying the same eggs, but for us, it can go up 4 or 5 times in price. I think the broader paradox of the supply chain for us is something Tory and I both felt really strongly about is we only wanted to start a dog food company if we were bringing something into the world that was genuinely new and different and better.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately why our product has resonated with so many dog parents. The flip side of that is it's really hard to make something like that, right? Because you can't just call up the Kibble factory and just place a PO for dog food. We had to kind of figure it out ourselves. And so we've kind of gone through these fits and starts of, all right, we figured out a small jerky kitchen where we can make our first batch. We've outgrown that. Where are we making our next level of food? And so scaling the supply chain has been really challenging. I mean, even from day one, it took us about 2 years to figure out, a way to make the food commercially before we launched. Yep. And every couple of years, we've kind of run into a different bottleneck. And, when we sort of reconnected last summer, we were in a bit of a crisis where we couldn't, basically the amount of food we thought we were able to make turned out to be much less. And it was on the one hand, a good problem to have that the demand for our product was greater than our ability to make it. On the other hand, it was still very much a problem because we had counted on certain growth to pay for our expenses and things like that. And all of a sudden we couldn't make as much food as we wanted. And so, we were fortunate enough and frankly, we worked really hard and also got a little bit lucky to find some partners that let us expand to this next level of scale. But as we learned the hard way a few times, as soon as you kind of figure out the one bottleneck, you kind of already have to start thinking about the next one. And, one of the amazing things about this test kitchen from where we're doing this podcast is it's really helped, I think, demystify some of our manufacturing process for us because we obviously are intimate, we kind of came up with it, so we're intimately familiar with it. But there's something about being able to come in here, make the food from start to finish ourselves on this kind of mini scale, which, first of all, I think it helps us inform how to make our product even better at where we're currently producing it. And then all of a sudden it starts to say, okay, what if we made our own facility one day where we kind of did it from the ground up? Because again, we've always been kind of repurposing other equipment that wasn't designed to make this new sort of dog food. It was designed to make jerky or it was designed to make, fruit roll-ups or something. And we've repurposed it for dog food. And so, again, I think one of the many ways in which we're just getting started and really excited to see how, again, Kibble's been perfecting how they make their food for 50 years. We've been at it for 5, but really have only had the capacity to start to elevate the manufacturing process for the last couple months. And so it's exciting to think where we can maybe take that in the next few years.
Totally. With regards to just getting started, the whole business to date has been direct to consumer. And I know you've talked about, meeting folks where they are with regards to their understanding of dog food and what the offerings are. How are you guys thinking about distribution?
For us, it's always been a question of when and how, not if, we're going to go into other sales channels because we do have this shelf-stable product that can easily go to places to meet dog parents where they are in a way that some of our competitors' products can't as easily because they deal with cold supply chains. I think for us, the challenge is, there's a lot of challenges, right? So I just saw a graph that just recently e-commerce sales as a percentage of all retail sales in the U.S. just returned to COVID levels. So, and I forget what the number is, if it's 30% or whatever, but the tricky thing is it's a little bit like catching a falling knife because we're selling online where all the behavior is moving to, right? And so still more dog food is sold in brick and mortar retail than it is online, but those sales channels are shrinking. And so how do we find the right partner, the right place to enter retail when we're, again, benefiting from these huge tailwinds of people going online in our current distribution channel of 100% direct to consumer. But again, ultimately, part of reaching every dog parent is getting our product to other places in front of people. And so, in the next couple of years, I think we're definitely going to start to experiment. And there's shades of gray, obviously, there's Amazon. And of course, in the pet food space, there's Chewy, which is sort of a own mini Amazon in our space. And then, there's all sorts of places where you sell dog food in brick and mortar. There are grocery stores, there are pet specialty retailers, there are independent pet shops, and they all have different pros and cons. But again, at this phase of our mission, it is all about just getting the word out and almost as like a billboard, if nothing else, just putting our food in other places is definitely a part of that.
How has the product experience itself shifted over time? I mean, I see the boxes here. I know there's been a lot of intentionality and thought given to things that many people probably would never even notice.
Yeah, well, I think one thing is obviously Sundays is a product for dogs, and first and foremost, we're worried about the dog, but we also take into account the human, and so we want it to be a great experience for both the dog and the human.
Look, I think something we say a lot internally is that you feed your dog twice a day, every day. That's 730 times a year. So if we can delight the human and make them smile or make that experience a little bit easier, better, funnier, then, we're kind of creating that connection with the customer. And so look, I think again, we're pretty early innings. We've, the cereal boxes is sort of this fun wink to the way that our customers treat their dogs as our kids. And also it's kind of coming in a shipping box anyways. But part of the idea with the cereal box was always to, because we're printing on paper, be able to tell different stories and do different fun things for the packaging. And up until recently, we were just kind of holding on for dear life and trying to make enough product to meet demand. And so we didn't really have the wherewithal to do that. But sort of watch this space. I think in the coming months, we're, planning to, again, use that as an opportunity to tell stories, to educate, to inspire, to spark joy in, again, this ritual that you do, almost 1,000 times a year. And I think there's also a lot, again, we were so laser focused on making the best dog food, which is, of course, the center of the experience. But I think there's so many improvements. As a founder, I'm always looking at everything we're doing today and thinking how much better it can be. And, you're thinking about the prototypes and the mock-ups for the next version that we're already working on. And I think from the website, from the unboxing experience, there's so much stuff we have in the works that's, we're starting to send to customers even this month of measuring cups and feeding bowls. And there's just so many little ways that I think we can elevate the experience further. And it's a privilege to be able to think about stuff like that. Because again, a couple of years ago, we just weren't in that spot where it's what could we deliver in terms of the food and just getting it to you on time and those little things. But now I think we have the luxury of looking at the whole experience. And again, you can see, I think some stuff, actually don't know exactly what's behind us, but there's some bowls we're experimenting with and just kind of figuring out, how can we elevate the whole experience even further?
This may seem like a strange question, but how are you guys thinking about AI?
I mean, it's such a good question. And, and we were talking about this the other day, but look, I think, and it's funny because the co-founder of my previous startup has become a luminary in AI and actually a co-founder of Anthropic. And so it's a space I've followed closely for a long time. And bringing it into commerce, I do think we have to start considering a future where the way people buy products does change pretty dramatically. And so maybe you ask ChatGPT, what's the best dog food? And people buy it directly from there without going to our website or without going to a brick and mortar store. And then you start to do the math of, okay, well, in that future, what actually really matters? What is creating value for the customer and as a business? And, look, I think there's kind of only a few things that will matter in that future. And fortunately, it's the things that largely we already think about and matter a lot today, but it's R&D and intellectual property, right? That is something that in that world becomes even more important, right? Because you kind of can't hide behind marketing as much when you have these super intelligences figuring out what's the best dog food. You really have to do the work to create the best dog food. So you have, R&D and IP, you have, operational excellence, right? I think we're still quite a ways off from robots building dog food factories and stuff. And so for us, again, it's like having operational excellence, making the best food at a reasonable cost, getting it to people. That's something we're going to continue to invest in. And then I think, brand is actually going to be probably more important in the future than in the past, because again, you're going to imagine a world where these super intelligences are just looking out for, again, you have someone go to ChatGPT, what's the best dog food? Again, you can't really fake it. You can't really hide. You actually have to be the best and invest into, being out there in the world and in places where the AIs and stuff can pick up on it. One dream of mine for AI is that we can use it to talk directly to dogs at some point in the near future. I think that's, I don't know what the science behind that is, but I think that, it wouldn't surprise me if AI could decode a dog whimpers and barks and, one of those like collars from a cartoon where like you're talking to dogs. Like, what if that's in our future? Sign me up for it.
How sci-fi is that concept?
Well, they're already using AI to decode whale language, which is not surprising because I feel like whales are incredibly complex creatures. So they're already using AI and I think they used AI to help figure out that dolphins like have individual names for each other. I don't know if exactly, but I mean, and all this, they're way smarter than we ever give them credit for.
Well, as dogs keep getting elevated in our society and kind of integrated into family structures, in some regards, we're investing as much into dogs and as we are into children. And where do you see all of this going, like with regards to dogs in society?
I mean, obviously I'm very partial to dogs being part of our families, but I think we live that every day. We have 3 human children, 3 dog children, and we all, coexist. Is our house a little crazy? Yes. Is it wonderful? Is it fun? Yes. So, I think that people really want that, life encompassing their dogs into their families. And, Sundays, obviously came out of that DNA and that DNA of us having our dogs as a part of our family. And so I think that as, humans start to evolve and as AI continues to evolve, I mean, maybe we'll be the dogs one day to the AI robots and, we'll just get fed and taken care of and taken for walks while AI does all the work. Is that the dream? But no, I think it is kind of really interesting kind of where this is all headed.
Yeah, and it's funny, as a dog food company, something that's been on our minds recently is I do think that there's a need for basically a class of standards that are kind of exist in between sort of other animals and humans, because I think that oftentimes cultural change and technological change happens faster than the legal system or the regulatory framework can catch up to
Certainly.
it. And so as, anyone who's familiar with like dog food would sort of like regulatory would know, it's regulated by a division of the USDA called AFCO, which is an acronym that in part stands for feed control. So it's literally like the division that oversees what you can feed cows and chickens and aquaculture fish.
It's like the software we use to formulate our diets is the same exact software I used in my animal nutrition courses in undergrad to create sheep rations and, chicken rations. So that is the same formula. So this is kind of where we are.
Yeah, and a generation ago, I do think dogs were kind of clumped in with those other animals, but I think we can all admit that that's no longer the case. And so again, so for instance, for us, like we're human grade, which means that everything that we do has to meet 100% of this FDA defined standards for fit for human consumption.
Yeah.
But right now it's this binary choice between feed grade, which is really designed for all these other animals, not dogs, and human grade, which again, as much as we overlook this sometimes because we do treat them as members of the families, dogs are a different species. So there are actually, for instance, organ meats that aren't really part of the human supply chain that are actually the healthiest source of certain nutrients for dogs. And right now, we actually struggle sometimes to get human-grade organ meats as an example, or this bone that we were talking about earlier, which is this pharmaceutical-grade, kind of crazy human-grade bone, but there's probably better ways to kind of get dogs the nutrients they need, but at the safety levels that we expect for humans. And so one of the things we're, starting to think about, again, as we have a little bit more time and resources to think about stuff like this is, what if there was actually like a third category of food safety that was, not human grade and not feed grade, but it was a, family grade or something like that, that kind of combine the food safety standards we expect for humans with some of the nutritional, specificities that dogs require, because again, they, at the end of the day, are not Homo sapiens. They're a different species and they need different things. And so I think, and that's for food, but you can zoom out. I think we need to rewrite a lot of our laws and policies about where dogs fit into in our lives. Dogs flying on planes, dogs going in restaurants, where right now there's a lot of tension because there's just dissonance with, again, you can take your family members to these places, but you can't take a goat into a restaurant, but should you be able to take a dog? Yeah, probably, but like under what circumstances and how do we keep it safe for everybody? And so I think there's we're pretty early on in trying to navigate how do we change some of the laws and the regulations to catch up with the way that we've culturally elevated dogs.
So I think you maybe introduced at least the topic a bit with the conversation on, the parts of work that are important to do in person.
Podcasts. No,
Podcasts, sure. No, it's a lot. How's the culture itself of Sunday evolved?
I mean, I think being in person has been such an unlock. I think it's one thing to look at someone in a Zoom box. It's another thing to roll up our sleeves and we'll put on our gloves and get to work in the kitchen working side by side. I think that it just creates such a rapport and it really builds those relationships. And I think everyone who we have on the team, which has been so awesome to see, everyone is willing to really just contribute in all aspects. So, for example, we have these highly trained food scientists that are happy to go out and figure out how they can find a mixer that best works for us. And if the electric on the mixer isn't working, figure out, I'm going to call this guy in to help fix the electric. And it's just one of those things where no one is above or below any job. And the idea that we're all kind of working towards this common goal and that we're all willing to kind of put in the work wherever it is, I think has just been so wonderful, especially over this past year and especially being in person. I think you really don't see that level of dedication without building those in-person relationships. And that's something that I've really appreciated over the past little bit. So,
yeah, I think that's, in person has been huge for us. And look, I think that a company will only go as far as its people. And something that I think we've started to be more deliberate about is really clearly, crisply articulating what are the shared values that define us and really having the audacity to live by them, to hire and fire by them and say, hey, these are the things that we believe in the way we do things that's different than the way that other companies do things. And if you're not up for that, it doesn't mean you're a bad person, or it doesn't mean that, you don't have maybe great expertise in your field, but you're just not going to love it here. And we need people who love it here because we work really hard and we try to tackle really hard problems. And we can't be on a different page. And so I think that, I think that's been a lesson though, because people talk about culture and values a lot, but it's way easier said than done to actually live by those values and have the courage to say, man, this person is the best at the world at what they do, but they don't share one of our core values. And so they probably shouldn't work here. And again, we've made that mistake of sort of bending that rule of, hey, we like to work fast, they like to work slow. oh, but they're so good at what they do. Let's find him a seat here. But and as we've started to focus on that though too, I do think there's this whole is greater than the sum of its parts of just everything just gets easier and more fluid and better. But again, though, I think we've really seen what it means to live by those values and because ultimately culture isn't what you say, it's what you do. And again, I think, in bringing it back to Tory's comment of in person, I think that's also accelerated that a little bit. I think just being in the same room with someone, working on a hard problem in a room can sometimes reveal whether your values are actually shared or not in a way that is probably faster than over Zoom.
How would you articulate what the culture of Sundays is?
Yeah, I mean, we have some core values that we're actually in the process of re-wordsmithing right now. And so, some of the, it's some of the examples of things of we have this value of seeking truth, not comfort. And again, I think it comes from this very, this mindset of scientific rigor and truth seeking. And it's not what do you want to be true, but what is actually true? Is this new recipe better than our old recipe? Yes or no? That isn't a question of wishful thinking. That's a question of empiricism. Is this new web page easier to use or harder to use? I'd like to think it's easier to use because I poured hours of my being into making it better, but we have to be honest about whether it is or not. And our customers ultimately tell us that, team over ego, there's all sorts of, and one of the things that I think good values have in common too is that they are somewhat distinct to us, right? I think that there are environments that maybe don't value intellectual honesty above all else. Maybe they, there's bigger organizations oftentimes that, politics becomes a bigger thing and you end up with these. Yeah, I mean, that's that's our only deal breaker now. But it's funny. That's even was sort of a debate about obviously you need to love dogs, but what does that mean? Do you have to have a dog? Do you have to, and so, calibrating that has been, look, I think it's been a great journey to just, again, figure out how we prioritize and, again, just articulate the shared behaviors that we really value and find important.
What does that future look like? What is the market of dog food? What is Sunday's role within it? What are you guys most looking forward to when you think about what comes next?
I mean, I think at this point, we're just trying to make Sundays a household name. And, hopefully we're in a bigger room. This one's getting a little tight. I think it's more about the world outside of this room. I want to be able to walk up to someone in the street and with a dog and ask them if they've heard of Sundays. And obviously I want that answer to be yes, but more than that, I want them to know exactly what we stand for and say, oh yeah, Sundays, they make the world's best dog food. And they're the most reliable resource for the modern dog parent because they're vet founded and they only use the best ingredients. And so I think that's the path we're going on. And look, we'd love 1 million dogs to eat Sundays every day. And one day, maybe 10 million dogs eat Sundays every day. And I think our work will be done when, the whole field is elevated and Sundays is kind of the default, right? And this level of health, food safety, taste, delight just is table stakes for the whole category. And again, hopefully we're leading that category, but even if we're sharing it with others, if the whole state of the art is elevated to where we think it should be and for what dogs deserve, then I think that will be mission accomplished.
When you reflect on the whole journey and everything we've talked about, are there any important parts that you feel we've missed that you want to share now?
obviously there's been a lot of changes, but I think just building out the team in person in Cleveland is something that I don't think 2 years ago either of us really had on our radar, and it's just been such an unlock.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Cleveland deserves a shout out too. It's funny, we before we even launched, this was 2019, where we only had prototypes of the food, and we hadn't yet figured out how to manufacture it commercially. But we went to this farmer's market around here, just with like little boxes and like a square reader.
Yeah.
And we had this sign printed up that said, "The world's best dog food is made in Cleveland." And so to kind of maybe tie it together, I think that would be my parting message, that, you know, if you know, I think the first thing I want you to know about us is that we make the world's best dog food, but in the top 5 is that we also make it in Cleveland.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect place to wrap it. Michael, Tory, thank you for taking the time, reflecting, and I look forward to the next one.
Let's get it on the calendar 2 years from now.
If folks wanted to learn more about Sundays, if they wanted to purchase Sundays, where on the interwebs should they go to learn more?
Sundaysfordogs.com. And and feel free, just, you know, if you want to shoot us an email, just founders@sundaysfordogs.com. And excited for you to try it.
Perfect. Thank you for tuning in to the Ohio Fund Report. If you enjoyed this podcast, we'd love for you to leave a review on your favorite platform and subscribe to stay updated on all future episodes. You can subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or directly on our website at theohiofund.com. The information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, an offer to sell, or a solicitation of an offer to buy any security. Past performance is not indicative of future results. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are solely their own and do not necessarily represent those of the Ohio Fund. A guest's participation in this podcast does not imply an endorsement or an investment recommendation by the Ohio Fund. This podcast may include conversations with leadership of a company in which the Ohio Fund or its affiliated funds have an investment, and as such, financial interest in the success of this company, and there may be a conflict of interest in presenting information about the company and its performance. Any forward-looking statements or projections discussed during this episode are based on current expectations, assumptions, and estimates. Actual outcomes may differ materially due to a variety of risks, uncertainties, and other factors. Listeners should consult their own legal, tax, and financial advisors before making any investment decisions. For more information about the Ohio Fund, including our Form ADV, other regulatory filings, and additional conversations, please visit theohiofund.com.